Welcome to all of you to this presentation on meaning of supply under the Model Goods and Services Tax Act 2016. Let us find out what is a taxable event first. An event on happening of which tax is levied under a statute is known as taxable event. At present, excess duty is applicable on manufacturing, service tax is applicable on rendering of services, and VAT is applicable on sale of goods, which largely involves transfer of property in goods. Under GST, it is going to be supply. So, unless we know the meaning of supply, we will not know our GST liability. In order to help us understand the meaning of supply, let us first go through the definitions of business. Subsection 17 of Section 2 defines business to include trade, commerce, manufacture, profession, vocation or any other similar activity, whether or not it is for a pecuniary benefit. Such incidental or ancillary transactions, whether or not there is volume, frequency, continuity or regularity. Supply or acquisition of goods, including capital assets and services, in connection with commencement or closure of business. Provision of facilities or benefits to its member by a club, etc., for a subscription or other consideration. Admission for a consideration of persons to any premises, and services supplied by a person as the holder of any office which has been accepted by him in the course of furtherance of his trade, profession or vocation. We can note that the definition is wide enough to include various activities like charitable activities, closure of business, admission to premises, etc. As it is an inclusive definition, the interpretation of the term business can be much wider than what has been listed above. Let us now come to the definition of supply as given under Section 3 of Model GST. The government has given us inclusive definition of supply also. So, the meaning of the term may be much broader than what we will discuss in the next few minutes. Under subsection 1A of Section 3, supply includes all forms of supply of goods and or services such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal, made or agreed to be made for a consideration by a person in the course of furtherance of business. So far, we have no problem in understanding the term supply, though we have noted that the term includes rentals, leases, etc. Now comes the next part of the definition. Under subsection 1B of Section 3, importation of service, whether or not for a consideration and whether or not in the course of further of a business, is a supply. Now we start doubting whether we have understood the implication of what we have read. If my brother in Australia helps me to design a nice landscape in front of my house, I would be squarely covered under this definition. For any import of services, neither there is a need for consideration nor a business motive. There is a small relief though. Under clause C of subsection 3 of section 9, import of services shall be exempted up to a limit which will be prescribed under the rules. Now comes the third part of the definition. Under subsection 1C of section 3, a supply which has been specified in schedule 1, made or agreed to be made without a consideration, will be included in the definition of supply. So, we move on to schedule 1 to know that it includes the following matters: permanent transfer or disposal of business assets, temporary application of business assets to a private or non-business use, for example, use of firm's car for shopping, services put to a private or non-business use, for example, use of company's data bandwidth for personal use, assets retained after deregistration. Please note that there is no transfer involved in this case. Supply of goods and or services by a taxable person to another taxable or non-taxable person in the course or furtherance of business. For example, if you buy one get one free, seller has to pay GST on the free supply also. It has been provided that supply of goods by a registered taxable person to a job worker in terms of section 43A shall not be treated as supply of goods. Subsection 2A of section 3 defines a supply between agent and principal. It specifies that where a person acting as an agent who, for an agreed commission or brokerage, either supplies or receives any goods and or services on behalf of any principal, the transaction between such principal and agent shall be deemed to be a supply. Subsection 4 of section 3 deals with services provided by aggregators. Under this subsection, branded service by an aggregator shall be deemed to be a supply of service by the said aggregator. Aggregator has been defined under section 43B to mean a person who owns and manages an electronic platform and, by means of the application and a communication device, enables a potential customer to connect with the persons providing service of a particular kind under the brand name or trade name of the said aggregator. At present, as taxation of goods and services are under the hands of different governments, we have double taxation in many cases, as both the state and the central governments have levied taxes for the same transaction. To settle the arguments in this regard, we have in subsection 2 a provision that Schedule 2 will determine whether the scheduled types of transactions are supply of goods or supply of services. Accordingly, 6 types of transactions are required to be treated as supply of goods. For example, transfer of future goods, that is, property therein will pass at future date, transfer or disposal of business assets with or without consideration, etc. 13 types of transactions are deemed to be treated as supply of services. For example, works contract, all the existing declared services under the present service tax laws, etc. A matter of concern here is that Article 246A, which has paved the way for implementation of GST Act, has superseded Article 246 and 254 only. It has not superseded Article 366(29)A, which categorizes some of these transactions as sale of goods. Suitable measures are required to be taken to resolve this conflict. To ensure that new types of hybrid transactions will not start fresh litigations, subsection 3 has been proposed. Subsection 3 of section 3 enables the central government to specify transactions which shall be treated as a supply of goods and not service, a supply of service and not goods, and neither supply of goods nor services. Let us recapitulate briefly the definitions of supply. We learned from subsection 1A of section 3 that supply includes certain transactions made for consideration in furtherance of business. Subsection 1B specified that all imports of services are supplies, whether for consideration or not, and for business purpose or not. Subsection 1C referred to Schedule 1 for list of supplies without consideration. Subsection 2A defined supplies between agent and principal. Subsection 4 brought into its net supplies of branded services by aggregators. For the removal doubts and litigations, subsection 2 referred to Schedule 2, which determines whether the supply is that of goods or services. Lastly, subsection 3 enabled the central government to clarify whether a supply is that of goods or services. Your suggestions. What we have been discussing in this video is not yet the law of the land. In order to engage with the stakeholders, government has made available the draft model laws on GST in the public domain on 14th June 2016. The link is available in www.mygov.in. Do provide your suggestions and comments on the model GST law to the government. Your suggestions will go a long way in making the law vibrant, taxpayer friendly, easy to administer, and free of litigations. Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has provided 2 sets of suggestions to the government on model GST. The suggestions relevant to the topic in hand are discussed here under. First suggestion is regarding definition of the word supply under subsection 1 of section 3. Section 12 subsection 6, explanations to section 44, section 21 subsection 7, etc. override this definition. Therefore, it is suggested that the words except as provided otherwise be added before the words supply includes under section 3. Instead of having different class of supplies like supplies by agents, aggregator services, etc. under different subsections of section 3, all the forms of deemed supplies be included in a single schedule, say Schedule 1. The next suggestion is regarding inclusion of imports for personal use in supply. Compliance with GST provision is a costly and time-consuming process, and as such, making it applicable on household personnel will not be fair to individual assessees. It is suggested that importation of services which are not in the course or furtherance of business be kept outside the purview of GST. The notification issued by government under Section 3 subsection 3 is issued upon recommendation of the GST Council. It is suggested that recommendation of the Council be made mandatory, as Council will take into account prospects and constraints involved in a particular transaction to treat and or not treat it as supply. It is also suggested that provisions be similar for all states and not left to the discretion of the states. Next suggestion is regarding Schedule 1, which provides list of activities which will be treated as supply without consideration. Clarity is sought in the meaning of the terms permanent transfer or disposal and business assets. Matters like whether stock transfer from one branch to another will be covered under permanent transfer or not also to be made clear. It is suggested that point 2, temporary application of business assets to a private or non-business use, be reconsidered, as it's a huge litigation prone area. Further, the word application be replaced with transfer, as this would provide the correct purpose or intent of the clause. In the context of the word asset used in Schedule 1, it is suggested that term asset be suitably defined. The same is also covered under Section 21, subsection 7. It be made clear that only those assets in respect of which input credits have been utilized against output tax liability and which are lying in stock or as capital goods should fall within the purview of assets held after deregistration, and GST shall be payable only on that. Further, it is suggested that the valuation mechanism be provided for valuing the transactions covered under Schedule 1. Clarity is sought on the inclusion and value of supply of demo goods, warranty replacements, free samples, scrap, etc. In point 5, the term supply be replaced with term movement, as supply causes confusion and there is no necessity to state any purpose behind the movement. Clarity is also sought on the aspect of supply of goods and services within the same business entity by way of stock transfer or branch transfer. Thank you very much for watching this video. Do encourage by giving a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Your suggestions for improving the quality and content of the video is most welcome. Thanks once again.